You don't wake up one day and just know. Betrayal doesn't usually knock on the front door, no announcement, no obvious flashing lights. It starts small, like a shadow creeping in around the edges, slipping through the cracks. For me, it began with a feeling, one that I couldn't name, and for a while didn't even want to acknowledge. It all started with her growing quiet about things that, until recently, she'd shared freely. Every little detail of her day, every random thought, used to be open between us. We were each other's sounding boards, our trusted confidants. But I noticed her pulling back, tucking her phone away just a little quicker, or hesitating before she shared things about her day. It was the subtle stuff, the kinds of changes that might have meant nothing to someone else. But to me, it felt like the first crack in a glass, small but inevitable. The worst part was, I had no reason to doubt her. I trusted her. I trusted us. We'd been married for years, had built a life together, created routines, traditions, and inside jokes that no one else would understand. We had stability, friendship, even comfort. But maybe that was the problem, comfort. Sometimes comfort can make you overlook things that, in hindsight, are glaringly obvious. I remember the night I first suspected something. It was a Friday, and she'd come home late, claiming she'd been out for drinks with colleagues. She came in with a smile, a little flushed, and kissed me with the same affection she always did, but there was something different in her eyes, a lightness that hadn't been there in a long time. It was like she was holding on to a secret, one that she wasn't sure whether she wanted to keep hidden or let slip. The conversation drifted to her time in college, as she reminisced about old friends and parties. She was laughing, her eyes distant, as if reliving a life I'd never been part of. And then, without warning, she mentioned his name, Daniel. I'd heard of him before, of course. She'd told me he was her first love, the one who made her heart race and showed her what romance felt like. Back when we first got together, she'd told me about him in a way that almost felt like a rite of passage, a story from her past that we both knew would never resurface. He was just a friend, she'd always say, brushing it off, as if the memory of him were little more than a faded photograph tucked away in a box somewhere. But this time, the way she said his name was different. There was a hint of longing in her voice, a trace of nostalgia that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Just a friend, right?" I asked, forcing a smile, trying to keep my voice light. She laughed, brushing it off, but there was a flicker in her expression, a moment of hesitation that I couldn't ignore. "Of course, just a friend. You know all about him, don't you?" she replied, as if the reassurance were meant for her as much as it was for me. But that look, that fleeting moment when her guard slipped, it haunted me. Over the next few weeks I noticed more little changes. She was on her phone constantly, always with a casual excuse that didn't quite add up. "It's just work," she'd say, or "a friend needed to talk." She'd slip away to check her messages in the bathroom or linger in the kitchen, typing furiously, her face illuminated by the screen. She started dressing up more, spending extra time getting ready before work or for a supposed casual night out with friends. She said she just wanted to feel good, to break the monotony, but it was hard not to wonder if there was another reason. I tried to ignore it, to brush off the unease as paranoia. We all have people from our past, right? And sometimes we reconnect with them, reminisce about old times, laugh at the stupid things we did back when we were young and naive. That didn't mean she was betraying me, but still, the doubt lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind, refusing to be silenced. It was late one night when I finally caved. She had fallen asleep beside me, her phone lying on the nightstand. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. I tried to resist, tried to tell myself that I was overreacting, that I was letting my imagination get the best of me, but the urge was too strong, the need to know too overwhelming. With trembling hands, I reached for her phone, feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. I unlocked it, heart pounding, knowing that whatever I found would change things forever, one way or another. And there it was, his name, Daniel. They hadn't just been reconnecting, they'd been sharing memories, talking about the what-ifs and could-have-beens. It was all there, laid out in black and white, a digital record of everything she hadn't been telling me. Each message felt like a punch to the gut, a slap in the face that left me reeling. There were old jokes, ones I'd never heard before, inside references that reminded me of just how much of her life I hadn't been part of. And then, nestled between the reminiscing and nostalgia, I saw the words I'd dreaded, words that drove a knife into my heart. I miss you. She had written it, late at night, when I'd been sleeping beside her, unaware that she was reaching out to him, sending messages that had no place in our marriage. I read it again and again, each time feeling the weight of it settle deeper in my chest. I miss you. 3 simple words that carried the weight of betrayal, words that shattered the illusion I'd been living under. She stirred in her sleep beside me, and I quickly put the phone back, my hand shaking as I tried to process what I'd just read. I wanted to scream, to wake her up and demand an explanation, but I couldn't. Instead, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls close in around me. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had betrayed me in a way I couldn't even begin to understand. The next day, I tried to act normal, to pretend that everything was fine, but the doubt was there, festering beneath the surface, a constant reminder of what I'd found. Every time she looked at me, every time she smiled, I felt a fresh wave of anger and hurt wash over me. How could she do this to me? How could she let him back into her life, knowing what it would do to us? But the worst part was, I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. I wanted to believe that there was some explanation, some reason that would make it all make sense. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd loved for so long, the woman I'd built a life with, hadn't thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of nostalgia. So, I waited. I watched, hoping for some sign, some hint that would prove my suspicions wrong. But as the days passed, as I saw the way she lit up when her phone buzzed, the way she'd go silent whenever I was around, I knew. Deep down, I knew that the woman I loved was slipping away from me, piece by piece, moment by moment, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the end, I felt like a stranger in my own home, a ghost haunting the life we'd built together. Every smile, every laugh, every shared memory felt tainted, overshadowed by the secret she was keeping from me. And as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my marriage unravel, powerless to stop it. But I couldn't hold it in forever. The anger, the hurt, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. It was all building up inside me, a storm waiting to break. And when it finally did, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Days drifted by in a painful haze after that night. I was barely holding it together, like a dam ready to burst. Every moment I was around her felt like torture. The same questions kept spinning in my head, questions I'd never have thought I'd be asking about my own wife. Why him? Why now? I couldn't look at her without seeing the betrayal etched into every smile, every word, every touch. And yet I couldn't bring myself to say it, to drag her secret into the open, and expose it to the harsh light of reality. Finally, after another sleepless night filled with anger and heartbreak, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I had to confront her. Even if I dreaded her answers, even if I wasn't sure I was ready for the truth, I needed to hear it. I needed to understand how the woman I loved could do this to me. It was a Tuesday evening, just after dinner. She was clearing the plates, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the kitchen lights. She looked peaceful, almost serene, as if everything were normal, as if she weren't hiding the sharp, painful truth from me. Watching her like that, Oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, I felt a surge of resentment. How could she carry on like this, knowing what she'd done? My voice broke the silence, harsher and more strained than I intended. "We need to talk." She looked up, startled, her hand freezing mid-reach as she registered the tension in my voice. "What's wrong?" she asked, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and confusion. Her reaction stung. I could tell she had no idea that I'd found her out, that I knew about the late-night texts, the stolen glances at her phone, the ghost of her past that had slipped back into our lives. I forced myself to look her in the eyes, my voice trembling, despite my best efforts to remain composed. "Is there something you need to tell me? Something about Daniel?" The moment I said his name, her face changed. The blood drained from her cheeks, her eyes wide with something that looked an awful lot like fear. For a moment, we just stared at each other, suspended in that awful silence that held the weight of everything unspoken. She looked away, her hands gripping the edge of the counter as she took a shaky breath. What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was a pathetic attempt at denial, and we both knew it. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling the anger and betrayal bubble to the surface. "Don't do that," I said, my voice low and cold. "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. I saw the messages. I know about the late-night conversations, the inside jokes, the I miss yous. I know, okay?" She closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping, as if the weight of her secret had finally crushed her. When she opened her eyes again, they were filled with tears. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just got out of hand." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that barely felt like my own. "Out of hand," I repeated, feeling a surge of anger rise up in me. "You think reconnecting with your ex and telling him you missed him was something that just got out of hand? Do you even understand what you're saying right now?" She flinched at my words, the guilt plain on her face. But there was something else there, something that looked suspiciously like regret, longing. My mind reeled, trying to process the myriad of emotions flickering across her face. Part of me wanted to reach out, to beg her to tell me that this was all some horrible misunderstanding, but I knew it wasn't. "I know it sounds bad," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But it's not like that. I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant for things to go this far." "Then why did you do it?" I demanded, feeling the anger and hurt clawing their way out. "Why him? Why now?" She looked away, her hands trembling as she wrung them together. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake. He reached out and it felt, I don't know, familiar, safe, and I was feeling lost, I guess." "Lost," I repeated, feeling the sting of her words like a slap to the face. "So you felt lost, and instead of coming to me, instead of talking to your husband, you turned to him." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I know it was wrong," she whispered, "but he was my first love, and when he reached out, it felt like I was reconnecting with a part of myself I'd forgotten." Her words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. There it was. She'd said it, the truth I'd been dreading. It wasn't just some fling, some meaningless mistake. She had chosen him because he reminded her of who she used to be, because he filled some void I couldn't. And in doing so, she'd shattered everything we had built together. I took a shaky breath, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Do you still love him?" Her hesitation was the longest moment of my life. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face contorting with pain. I don't know," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "It's not that simple. He's a part of my past, a part of who I used to be. But that doesn't mean I don't love you." "But it's not enough, is it?" I said bitterly. feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a suffocating blanket. "I'm not enough." She shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "That's not true. I love you, I swear I do. I just got lost. I didn't know how to handle it, and he was there." I took a step back, feeling the distance between us widen into a chasm I wasn't sure we'd ever bridge. "You could have talked to me," I said, my voice cracking. "You could have come to me instead of turning to him." "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with guilt. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I don't know how to make it right. I don't even know if I can. But please, please believe me when I say that I never meant for this to happen." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and meaningless. She didn't mean for it to happen, but it had happened, and there was no taking it back, no undoing the damage she had done. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I had married, the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I thought I knew. But she was a stranger to me now, a stranger who had betrayed everything we had built together. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't even know if I want to." She closed her eyes, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I understand, and I'm so, so sorry." We stood there in silence, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on us, suffocating us. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had shattered it in a way I could never have imagined. And as I looked at her, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder. Was it my fault? Had I pushed her away? Had I failed to give her something she needed, something she'd found in him instead? The doubts gnawed at me, mixing with the anger and heartbreak, until I didn't know what I felt anymore. I wanted to scream, to yell, to demand answers that would make it all make sense. But I knew, deep down, that there were no answers, no explanations that could take away the pain. And as I stood there, looking at the woman I'd once loved more than anything, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, drowning out the anger, leaving only a hollow ache where my heart used to be. In that moment, I realized that the love we had shared, the trust we had built, was gone, replaced by a shadow of what it used to be. And as I turned away, unable to look at her any longer, I knew that whatever came next, it would never be the same. We would never be the same. Living with the betrayal felt like trying to breathe underwater. Each day I woke up feeling as if there was a weight on my chest, a heaviness that I couldn't shake. I'd open my eyes, glance over at her lying beside me, and feel the memories of that night flood back in vivid, painful detail. It was like a movie I couldn't turn off, playing on an endless loop in my mind. She would stir beside me, maybe reach out, but every time her hand touched my shoulder, or her arm brushed against mine, I'd feel my whole body tense. I was living with a stranger in my own home, a woman who had once been my everything, but was now a ghost of the person I thought I knew. She'd apologized 100 times, said all the right words, done all the things she thought would somehow fix the mess she'd made. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if I even wanted to. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw everything we'd built away, to walk out and never look back. But then there was the other part, the part that remembered the good times, that clung to the memories of our early days, when things were simpler and cleaner. Each day felt like a battle with myself. One moment, I'd remember the laughter we shared, the life we'd built, and think maybe, just maybe, we could move past this. But then I'd remember the messages, the lies, and that feeling of betrayal would sweep over me, drowning any hope I had of forgiveness. I tried to go about my life as best I could. I'd go to work, put on a brave face, smile at the jokes, nod along with the conversations, all the while feeling like I was detached from reality. It was as if I were watching myself from a distance, seeing this version of me who was going through the motions, while the real me was trapped somewhere deep inside, screaming to be let out. My coworkers, my friends, they could all tell something was wrong. They'd ask if I was okay, if I needed to talk, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. How could I? How could I admit that my wife, the woman I had loved for years, had betrayed me in the most personal way? Our home, once a place of comfort and warmth, now felt like a prison. Every room was tainted with memories of her, of us, of the life we'd shared. I couldn't look at the kitchen table without remembering the dinners we'd shared, the laughter, the conversations that once filled the silence. Our bedroom, once a place of intimacy and trust, now felt cold and foreign. I couldn't look at our bed without feeling the weight of her betrayal, without picturing her messages to him, the words she'd written late at night while I lay asleep beside her. And then there was her. She'd walk around the house like she was walking on eggshells, her face etched with guilt and regret. She'd try to talk to me, to explain herself, but every time she opened her mouth, I felt the anger rise up inside me, choking me, making it impossible to listen. I didn't want her apologies. I wanted the past back. I wanted the life we had before she'd let him back in. But I knew that was impossible. The trust we'd once shared was gone, shattered into pieces that I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. I tried to find solace in other things. I threw myself into my work, stayed late at the office, buried myself in projects that would keep my mind occupied. I'd go to the gym, pushing myself harder and harder, trying to drown out the pain with exhaustion. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the thoughts, the memories, the constant gnawing ache that seemed to follow me everywhere I went. One night, after yet another sleepless evening lying beside her, I found myself wandering around the house. I ended up in our living room, surrounded by pictures of us, smiling, happy, unaware of the storm that would one day tear us apart. I picked up a photo of us from our wedding day, our faces filled with joy, our eyes filled with a love that, at the time, had felt unbreakable. I looked at her smile, her eyes shining with happiness, and I felt a wave of anger and sadness crash over me. How could she throw all of that away? How could she let him back into her life, knowing what it would do to us? I wanted to scream, to break something, to do anything to release the pain that was tearing me apart, but I didn't. Instead, I sank down onto the couch, clutching the photo in my hands, feeling the tears streaming down my face. The next morning, she found me there, still clutching the photo, my face drawn and tired from another night of broken sleep. She looked at me, her face filled with pain and guilt, and I could see the weight of what she had done etched into every line of her expression. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Please let me make this right." I looked at her, seeing the woman I had loved, the woman I had shared my life with, and I felt a surge of anger and sadness rise up inside me. "How?" I demanded, my voice filled with bitterness. "How do you plan to make this right? You can't take it back. You can't erase what you did." She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," she whispered, "but I want to try. I want to prove to you that I love you, that I want to be with you." "But you weren't thinking about that when you were talking to him, were you?" I said, my voice laced with anger. "You weren't thinking about us, about what we have." She looked away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm so sorry." Her apology hung in the air between us, empty and meaningless. She could apologize 1,000,000 times, and it wouldn't change what she had done. It wouldn't bring back the trust, the love, the security that we had once shared. In the days that followed, we tried to find a way forward. We went to counseling, sat in a room with a stranger who asked us to open up about our feelings, to share our pain, our anger, our hurt. I tried, I really did. I wanted to find a way to move past this, to rebuild what she had broken. But every time I looked at her, every time I heard her voice, I felt the anger rise up inside me, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. She'd reach out to me, try to hold my hand, try to show me that she was still there, that she still loved me. But her touch felt foreign, her love tainted. I couldn't look at her without seeing him, without picturing the messages, the words she had shared with him, words that should have been meant for me and me alone. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when I thought maybe, just maybe, we could make it work. We'd sit together on the couch, watching a movie or share a quiet dinner, and for a moment it would feel like old times. But then the memories would come rushing back, and I'd feel the weight of her betrayal all over again, a constant gnawing ache that wouldn't let me go. One night, as we sat in silence, I finally turned to her, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, the words feeling like a confession, an admission of defeat. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Please," she whispered, "please don't give up on us." I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could find a way through this. But as I looked into her eyes, I felt a hollow emptiness inside me, a void that I wasn't sure could ever be filled. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and still the pain lingered. Our life became a series of empty moments, a routine filled with silence and unspoken words. We existed side by side, sharing a home, sharing a life, but the love we had once shared was gone, replaced by a shadow of what it used to be. I didn't know what the future held, or if we'd ever find a way to move past this. But as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The life we had built, the love we had shared, was gone, shattered by a betrayal that neither of us could undo. And so, we continued, living side by side, trapped in the aftermath of a choice that had changed everything.